My name is Dave Barker, and I am sad to say that today is the day that my marriage to Claire Hughes ends. Our story began so promisingly 14 years ago. I worked for a company that distributed pumps and motors. We were the largest company in the tri-state area. We did not manufacture pumps and motors. We distributed them from large manufacturers. The company was doing very well, and part of their success was me and my team. You see, the CEO, Gary Powers, believed that if they had a mechanical engineer on staff, along with one or two lathe operators, it would actually make the company better. I was an engineer. He was right. Our job was to test new types of pumps and motors that manufacturers were trying to sell us. We have also been diagnosing problems with existing lines. Our first success almost became our end. One company from Germany advertised a new super pump for industrial waste. The company had an excellent reputation and sold these new pumps as quickly as they could produce them. We had already worked with them and asked for a couple of samples. The Germans were happy to provide them, but wanted an exclusive agreement for North America. We had a week to make a decision, otherwise they would have looked for other partners. My team and I had been working for about 6 months at that time, and we were already making progress. For example, there was a valve problem on one of our popular pumps that only occurred under certain conditions, and we solved it by modifying the valve, which was both cheap and easy to do. Gary had been very pleased up to this point, and then he gave us the news about the new pump. Logically, the pump should really have been the obvious choice. The company was from Germany. They definitely knew how to engineer things and had a proven track record. We just had to go through the formalities of learning about the pump and then sign the deal, get exclusive, and double our annual pump sales. But Gary Powers wasn't stupid. He had worked his way up from scratch and knew if we didn't try and didn't try hard enough, it would be a cardinal sin in our company. Making mistakes due to hard work was acceptable, but laziness was not. Mistakes due to lack of care were grounds for dismissal. We had 3 samples to test. One worked for 7 days, pumping a thick slurry full of debris. We exposed it to all sorts of climates, desert heat and dust, cold and snow, and rain and moisture. With the other, we tried everything: dust, dirt, chemicals. The pump did not like sand, and the sand combined with the slurry was harmful to one of the components. I won't bore you with the engineering details, but it didn't give me and the team any confidence, so we told Gary not to buy it. However, we tested 2 more new pumps at the same time, and one from an Italian company showed more promise. We recommended that one. For the next 6 months, the sales team hated us. Sales of the Italian pumps were unimpressive, but the German pumps we rejected were selling like hotcakes. Then reports began to come in, first from the Southwest, of pump failures. In short, the company that made the deal with the Germans almost went bankrupt due to recalls, repairs, and bad publicity. Sales of our Italian pumps took off, and the sales department threw my team a dinner. The worst part of my job was working with our publicist. Gary believed that I should be present when our advertising company came up with a new advertising idea. He didn't want us to be shamed for advertising that promised too much or was technically unrealistic. It made sense, but it was still hard to take in so much nonsense at once. The only saving grace was that the man I usually worked with, Jeff Barons, was a pleasure to work with, a true professional. However, I just didn't like the advertising business, but I had to do what I had to do. That was until one day Jeff brought someone else with him to take over our account. He was promoted and Claire Hughes became our new publicist. When she walked into our conference room, I was amazed. She literally left me speechless. She wasn't a stunning beauty or had huge breasts or long legs or anything like that. Claire was slightly above average in looks and was nice to look at, but she just seemed like what I needed in my life. Somehow I was able to make it to the end of the meeting without embarrassing myself, although I don't remember anything that was said. I spent most of the time just looking at her and trying to think of a way to ask her out. Jeff seemed to notice my problem and made sure to hand me her business card, telling me to contact her for further feedback on the sales pitch. I waited until the next day and called her at work. She seemed surprised to hear me, but agreed to the date. We dated for 6 months before she was convinced that she really liked me. She couldn't understand why a guy like me would want to be with her. This was my introduction to her insecurities. I was just the male equivalent of her, a little above average, but nothing special. However, she thought she was out of my league and was afraid of being offended. Before we slept, she wanted to be sure that I wouldn't leave her right after. Claire wanted an exclusive relationship, and somehow I had to back it up with evidence to allay her fears. The fact that I was already with her on exclusive terms was just words. There was only one way I could think of, so I surprised her with an engagement ring, and she said yes. This must have been the proof she was looking for. We had a lot of wonderful sex in the next year before our wedding. Life was good, we both worked hard, and soon we started talking about children. That's when her insecurities began to get the better of her again. Everything blew up at our Christmas office party that year. My team usually stuck together at these events, so when our new administrative assistant arrived, Claire was horrified. I'll be the first to admit that Roxanne is a real beauty, but she also had a very handsome husband. More importantly to me, she was good at her job, and that helped our team a lot. We worked, and she did the documentation. However, Claire saw only the impending romance, and the tension was palpable. When we left the party, she started yelling at me even before I closed the car door behind her. I slowly walked around to my door, but she didn't stop until we got home and were in our bedroom. She stopped screaming at this point, and I calmly asked her, "What do I need to do to get you to trust me?" She said she doesn't know, but we won't have children until she figures it out. I then suggested that it didn't mean we couldn't practice. I could show her how much I loved her. She was too excited, so she put it off until the morning. It's really strange to me that a woman who thinks you might cheat on her would refuse sex for this reason. Well, I just took advantage of it in the morning, and we stayed in bed until noon. Exactly 2 weeks and 2 days later, I learned that she had found the answer when she presented me with a postnuptial agreement. Yes, uncertainty takes its toll. It covered every possible aspect of custody, child support, maintenance, and our home. It's not like we have a home. It's quite difficult to give exact amounts, but there were a lot of formulas based on percentages of future earnings and the like. The lawyer who reviewed it for me said it was fairly normal. In fact, if Claire cheated, I would be in a great position with sole custody and child support. In addition to the post-nuptial agreement, our phones had to have a locator app, and the passwords for our phones and laptops had to be shared. Random testing was to be allowed at any time. Obviously, I signed the post-nuptial agreement and agreed to the phone and laptop idea. I had no intentions of cheating on her or leaving her. I loved this woman, and 3 years later we had Leslie and twins Max and Mark. Claire returned to work as soon as possible after each birth to continue her career advancement. It's no surprise that she was very insecure about her position and advancement, but she had children, and I'm very happy about that. Best of all because I was expected to be the primary caregiver. We never talked about it, but she liked her job and wanted to advance. I have already accepted that I will be in second place after her work. I did, however, check her phone and laptop for any unusual activity. I also always looked at our locator app to see where she was when she was late at work. I have to admit, I was a little suspicious that she might be trying to get ahead at work by having sex on the side. This was definitely not the case. Her boss, Jeff, told me at a social event that my wife had earned the nickname Madam Seriousness. It was better than Ice Queen or Bitch, but it meant about the same thing. She was work, work, work. She didn't have friends at work, didn't flirt, and was focused on being the best. People respected her hard work, but were put off by her cold demeanor. Men especially sensed her attitude, and, unless they worked for or with her, avoided her. There were many more accessible women in the company. Then came a second explosion of uncertainty in our marriage. Claire wanted separate finances from the start, one joint account where we contributed 50-50 to family accounts, and the rest didn't matter to the other. If I wanted to invite her somewhere, I paid. Vacations were 50-50, but over time she wanted to go on vacation less and less. She might not have been at the top of the list for the next promotion if she hadn't always been there. Well, the kids were really young. This wasn't a big problem, but as they got older, it became a problem. However, first there is a second explosion, and then we can talk about vacations. I wanted to start my own pump and motor company. I had a few ideas that I was working on in my studio at home, and I wanted to bring them to life. I first tried to get Gary interested in starting production. Gary, who I enjoyed working with, turned out to be retiring, and his son was going to succeed him. Andrew Powers didn't like our team at all. He was entertained enough by our suppliers that he wanted to get rid of us. We asked too many questions and rejected too many new models, so we had to leave. His father, Gary, and I had a serious conversation when I came to him with the idea of starting to make my own products. I thought he would support the idea, but at the end of our conversation, he told me that I should take my team and start my own business. He will give us a guaranteed 3-year exclusive contract to continue what we have been doing to help us establish ourselves. He was going to retire in 3 years, and he knew his son wanted to kick us out. We would have our way, one way or another. Maybe we could even sell them pumps and motors, but that would be at Andrew's discretion. What an amazing opportunity, and I couldn't wait to get home and tell Claire. It didn't go well. That's putting it mildly. How could you do this to me? How will we be able to pay for our house? She insisted that she would not support me or get me out of trouble. What she did tell me was that she was very confident that my idea would fail and leave us destitute. I had to make my monthly payment, or else. What else? You may ask. Less than a week later, I learned that explosion number 2, or an addition to the first, appeared exactly a week later. Our marriage money agreement was now set to be set in stone forever. Her money in any form was to be kept out of my reach. In turn, my money and my new business were unavailable to her. The payment on the joint bank account was due every month with no excuses, medical or otherwise. Basically, she was confident that my business would fail and I would return to a stable job. If I could not meet my obligations, I might go bankrupt as far as she was concerned, and I would be forced to leave until I could meet my obligations. Claire refused to listen to anything about my guaranteed contract or the patents I filed for my ideas. She wanted financial security, period. I was obviously not very happy with Claire's lack of support, and the second part, after the wedding. But as you can imagine, my lawyer couldn't believe she would sign it. He and the other lawyers at his firm knew my business plan and believed that by age 35, I would be a millionaire. If something goes wrong and we get divorced for any reason, she won't get anything. So I signed it despite her lack of faith in me, but I loved her and didn't care about money or infidelity. You could say I felt completely safe. My business took off, and soon we were making pumps and motors and employing 50 people. Roxanne was still with me and was my director's supervisor. Without her, I wouldn't be able to juggle the startup and the needs of my children. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed their sports and school activities, but she helped me make it happen. Claire, of course, got promoted again and spent more and more time at work. There was a problem. We never went on vacation as a family. Claire didn't take any days off at all. She thought that if she missed even one day, she might miss something and get in trouble, or worse, get a bad performance review. Yes, I thought maybe there was something more to it, and I kept an eye on her and even hired a private investigator for a week, but she just worked. The private investigator even gave me a discount because Claire did nothing but work and came home. Before this, vacations consisted of me and the kids. We went camping to the lake, to the beach, to the mountains, and to my parents who lived in another state. Claire stayed at work, that is, at home. However, things came to a head when Leslie, Mark, and Max asked to go to Disneyland. They asked me, and I said, sure, that's a good idea. They're at the age where they can really have fun there. Leslie was 9, and the twins were 7. They wanted to know when we could go and if Mom would go with us. I said we could go to their school for spring break, but they would have to ask Mom. I immediately sent Claire a message warning her what was in store for her when she got home. Claire was a workaholic, but almost always came home for dinner. She tried her best to keep everyone interested and then washed the dishes with the kids while I usually prepared dinner. I left for work early and returned at 4 so that I could be at home with the children and cook dinner. Then she would usually grab her laptop and go back to work on our couch or at the kitchen table, depending on where I was. After the kids went to bed, we didn't have to wait long. We have sex quite often, maybe 2 or 3 times a week, with Sundays usually being the best. That evening, Claire returned home from work, and the children were telling her about Disneyland. She was not very happy. She put them off with all sorts of excuses, but it was all a smokescreen because she didn't want to leave work for a week. That evening, I told her that I would really like her to come. I will pay for all this, and if not, then we will go without her. She was a little upset that I was paying for all this, so I quickly agreed to pay half if she went. After 2 days of the kids pestering her about it, I arbitrarily gave her a week to make a decision, presumably because the flight was selling out. She reluctantly agreed. Leslie, Mark, Max, and I were very happy. We were happy, at least until we arrived on spring break Monday and decided to relax and go to the beach. Claire said she was just going to check on something and catch up with us. We didn't see her until we got back to the hotel for dinner. Then on Tuesday, he went to Universal Studios, and Claire turned it down too. That night, after everyone was asleep, I bought Claire a ticket home. When she woke up the next morning, the 4 of us were getting ready to go to Disneyland. The kids were very excited, but Claire was not. She explained to us that she just needed the morning and would join us in the afternoon. That's when I gave her a ticket and told her she should just go home and go back to work. She was very upset, and I said that we should be on vacation and she could make a choice, work or us. We were leaving in 5 minutes, with or without her. She came with us and had fun, but she will never go on holiday with us again. Life went on, and my company grew to 150 employees, although I never talked to Claire about it. She thought she made more money than me, and that made her feel good. Claire called my pump and motor repair shop, making it sound like it was a tiny repair shop or something. If I started talking about my company and our millions of dollars in sales, I figured it would make her feel insecure. Claire seemed to be completely safe with me and her family life now, and that was enough for me. However, she was not safe at work. There were 4 people in front of her at work, and she only wanted one. Albert Morris's owner, CEO position was out of reach for her, but there were 3 vice president positions she could apply for, one of which she particularly coveted. There was a VP of administration, a VP of operations, and a VP of creative. Claire wanted to be VP of creative so badly that she got a taste of it. However, the current holder of the position, Jeff Barons, was still quite young and was her mentor and supporter in her career with the company. She accepted one of the other positions and worked twice as hard to understand everything they did. The VP of operations was an experienced company employee who respected Claire and believed she would take over Jeff's position when he retired. The vice president for administration was new, and his name was Charles "Chuck" Adams. He was relatively new to the company and believed he could crack Madame Serius's code. In his mind, she was just a child, and since he loved a challenge, he was going to seriously try to get her into bed. He knew that she wanted a promotion, and this fact would become the fulcrum on which his seduction would be based. Claire must know that Albert Morris would make the decision without much input from the other vice presidents. However, he also knew that she was unsure of herself, and he could use this point of view as best he could. At the end of November, Albert told the other vice presidents that Jeff was resigning, but he said nothing yet because he wanted to announce it at the Christmas party in December. Chuck immediately began working on Claire. The next time he saw her, he made sure to mention her great job and how she should become vice president. In the remaining time before the Christmas party, he made sure to hint or make subtle hints that the other vice presidents had contributed to the promotion. He also made sure to tell Claire that the company needed new blood, so the next vice president would likely come from outside the firm, like himself. Chuck's plan was definitely working. Claire was stressed. She knew deep down that Albert would make a decision if and when there was a vacancy for the position of vice president. She also knew that if Jeff retired, he would recommend her. He had already told her that, and after 5 promotions, she trusted Jeff. However, she couldn't shake the growing doubt in her mind that her hard work might not be enough. It made sense that the next vice president could come from outside, like Chuck. Of course, Claire didn't know what would happen at the Christmas party, but by then she was much more vulnerable to Chuck's plan. These uncertainties kept popping up in her mind. Dave wasn't looking forward to Claire's Christmas party at all. Every year it was the same. Claire was the organizer, host, and general overseer of the party. This role and her usual business-like approach meant that Dave would be alone for the entire evening. She would place him at dinner next to the boring men, while she sat with the most important clients who were always invited. Then she would spend the rest of the evening working one way or another while he stood at the bar drinking with Jeff. When some new employee or longtime employee who didn't like Madame Sirius asked him to dance, he politely refused. One time he made the mistake of dancing with another woman, and it didn't end well. Then they went home late, and she was really tired. This year Dave had enough, and, as they were driving to the party, he had a short conversation with Claire. "Listen, Claire, I'm tired of the same thing every year at your Christmas party," he said. She replied, "What do you mean?" "It's simple. I'm not going to spend another party alone and bored. If you ignore me all night and don't even give me one dance, I'll leave early." She was so caught up in all the details of the party and her role in it that she simply went along with what he said, essentially ignoring him. Dave knew he would go home early, and he did. However, he had a very interesting and disturbing conversation with Jeff before leaving. Of course, after dinner and the traditional CEO speech, the party was full of news about Jeff's upcoming retirement next year. Dave asked Jeff about it and learned some very interesting things. First of all, Jeff was 60, and he and his wife wanted to travel. They had enough money and they wanted to enjoy it before it was too late. Then came the interesting part. Jeff thought Claire might do something stupid to try to secure a promotion to his place. He heard Chuck talking to her and putting doubts in Claire's mind that her amazing work, skills, and experience might not be enough. Jeff knew about her obsession with work and her insecurities firsthand. Claire even told him about the trip to Disneyland and how it caused her so much internal conflict that she couldn't do it again. Dave also learned about Claire's work nickname at this time. He knew from his checks and the fact that she had done nothing suspicious in all these years that she was completely dedicated to her work. However, he did not know about the nickname Madame Seriousness and how many men she had actually rejected, both colleagues and clients. It was alarming to learn that it looked like this Chuck guy was going to try to win his wife. What's more, it didn't help that Claire seemed focused on communicating with one particular person that night. Of course, she was busy with her duties of managing the party, but she kept coming back to the same person. Younger than Claire and Dave, and clearly handsome, this guy clearly knew it. Dave asked Jeff who it was, and was not surprised to learn that it was Chuck, the vice president of administration, exactly the man he had warned Dave about. It was almost 10:00 p.m., and Dave had drunk quite a bit and refused a couple of dances. He decided it was time to leave, but gave Claire a chance and began walking in her direction. As he approached Claire and Chuck, Claire noticed him coming and didn't want him to interrupt their conversation. She discussed information with Chuck about how to get the position of vice president, and he willingly shared information. Claire knew Dave wanted to dance with her, but she was busy with work. So she made eye contact with Dave and then deliberately turned away from him. Dave wasn't stupid and took the insult for what it was. He turned around and left. Claire didn't notice his departure for obvious reasons and was too busy with the rest of the night to even miss him. It wasn't until 1 a.m., as the party was about to end, that she noticed Dave was gone. She asked Jeff, who was still there, if he had seen Dave and was unhappy with his answer. He told me that if you didn't dance with him, he would leave. He told me that he already told you this. And when you didn't dance with him, he left. Claire felt embarrassed, but remembered that Dave actually said something like that. But at the same time, she was angry because he did not support her work. She was working on Chuck and her promotion. How could he do this to her? Her anger grew as she waited for a taxi to go home. As she walked through the door, she built up enough energy to burst into the bedroom and wake Dave with a loud, "How could you just leave? I was so embarrassed that you left me there without even saying goodbye. You say you support my work, but you left me in limbo when I needed that support. How could you—" At this point, Dave woke up and had enough. Listen, I warned you, Claire, that if you ignore me all night, I'll leave. I just needed one dance. Do you think I feel like you've literally turned your back on me for the company of another man? This startled Claire, not only the tone, which was unusual for Dave, but also the implication that she was more interested in the other man than in him. Dave continued, I can't dance with anyone but you, and you don't want to dance with me. I respect that, and don't even look at the women you work with. But then you should show more interest in Chuck than to me. It's too much. I supported you at home and in every possible way I could think of. I'm proud of your success at work and have told you that many times and done everything you asked. However, sometimes I'm a little disappointed that we don't spend holidays together and work clearly comes first in your life. Now I'm going to bed. Claire left the room and went downstairs to think about what Dave had said. After much thought, she realized that Dave was right, and she had to change. First, she just needed to get promoted to vice president, and then she could relax a little and pay more attention to Dave and the kids. By the time she came to this conclusion, it was almost 7 a.m., so she joined Dave in bed. She tried to spend quite a lot of time at home over Christmas, at least quite a lot for her, and tried to spend quality time with her husband and children. Then the new year came and she returned to serious work. Now that the news has been made public, Chuck has stepped up his campaign against Claire. Albert announced that they are accepting applications and interviews will begin in February. They hope to appoint a new vice president by April. Jeff asked Claire if she was going to apply, and she responded by giving him a completed application form and an updated resume. Jeff tried his best to explain that Albert would make the decision and that Jeff supported her candidacy. However, despite his efforts, he could tell that Claire was very unsure of her chances. Of course, Chuck was the root cause of these insecurities. Dave's parents' wedding anniversary was on February 10th, and Dave and his children usually went to celebrate with them for the weekend. Claire hasn't gone for the last 11 years, so it wasn't a surprise to Dave that she wouldn't go this time either. His parents lived 4 hours away across the state line, so they usually left right after school on Friday and returned on Sunday afternoon. Dave asked Claire to go again, but she told him she couldn't leave because of an important meeting with a client on Friday. Chuck continued his maneuvers towards Claire. He started with sexual innuendos and increased the flirting. Claire became more and more anxious every day. She was the first one to show up at the front desk when the mail arrived. She tried to subtly ask Sherry from HR how many applications had been received. Sherry worked directly for Chuck, and he became convinced that he had inflated the number of external applications and their qualifications. Sherry then relayed this information to Claire, unwittingly aiding in her seduction. Because Chuck spent so much time at work next to Claire, he learned on Monday that Dave was leaving with the kids for the upcoming weekend. Conveniently, his own wife, Doris, was going to visit her twin brother, Mike, that same weekend. Mike and his wife lived about an hour away, and Claire always followed the same routine. She left on Friday afternoon and stayed overnight, returning on Saturday evening. Mike and Doris were as close as twins can be, and this usually happened once every 2 months. Chuck couldn't believe his luck. After an all-out attack all week, on Friday morning, Chuck made sure Sherry told Claire about a star candidate for vice president who had just submitted her resume. After Chuck was sure Sherry had spoken to Claire, he made his move. He walked into her office at 4 p.m. and asked what Claire would be doing for dinner. I was just planning on going home when I was done and eating the leftovers, she replied. Why don't we go get something to eat somewhere? Then we can really work on strategy to make sure you get the promotion you deserve. Claire thought about it. Dave and the kids were away, and she still needed to eat. Okay, how about we leave at 6 p.m., she answered Chuck. Chuck was delighted. I'll make a reservation for us at a nice restaurant. See you in the parking lot at 6 p.m. Claire spent the next 2 hours unable to work. She couldn't stop thinking about all the candidates for the coveted position of vice president and how she could make sure it would be her. By the time it was almost 6 p.m., she was extremely agitated. She then received a text message from her husband, Dave. Hope the important meeting went well. Any plans for tonight? Claire thought about her answer. She didn't want to lie, but at the same time, she couldn't tell him that she was going to meet Chuck. She replied, "The meeting went well. I'm going to have a drink with some work colleagues to celebrate." Dave was surprised by this unusual behavior of Madame Seriousness. He replied, "Have a good time, miss you." Claire was surprised by how easily the lie came, but she rationalized that it was a big promotion, so it was all for a good cause. Dave would be proud of her. Dave suggested that Claire would head to the bar across from her office, Dino's. He decided to check his locator app at 6:30 p.m. and noticed she wasn't at that bar, but at D'Angelo's, a high-end restaurant. He couldn't believe it. Did she lie to him? Claire and Dave had been to D'Angelo's a few times, but he couldn't remember if there was a bar there. He kept checking the locator app. At approximately 9 p.m., the app showed that Claire was now at Skylab, the city's most popular club. Dave didn't want to be paranoid. It could all be explained by the fact that Claire needed dinner, so they went for food first and then drinks. This was still unusual behavior for Claire, so after his parents and children went to bed, he logged into the Skycam. The Skycam was a fun gimmick from Skylab that made it the hottest club in town. Claire created it as part of a marketing campaign. Positioned above the DJ, the Skycam showed part of the dance floor directly in front of the DJ. The camera slowly panned back and forth. Privacy issues were addressed with a notice at the entrance to the club and a sign on the DJ console. Local celebrities were invited to make sure they were visible on Skycam, which was, of course, broadcasting live. Skylab also apparently had a highlight reel of some of the top celebrities who visited the club. It was a very popular feature, and yet it only covered about a quarter of the dance floor, so it was easy to miss the camera's view. Dave watched for about 15 minutes when, to his regret, he saw his wife and none other than Chuck walking by. Dave took a deep breath and tried to relax. All this was understandable. However, Dave began to write down what he saw. The group from work included Chuck, and they were just having fun. He continued to look and carefully looked for other people from Claire's work. Dave didn't recognize anyone until he saw Claire dancing with Chuck again. However, this time it was a slow song and they were dancing too close for Dave's comfort. Chuck was everywhere and she didn't resist at all. In fact, she seemed to reciprocate his feelings. When the song ended, Claire and Chuck were still visible at the edge of the camera's view. It was very clear to Dave that they were now kissing. Dave then went to his photo gallery and found a list of Claire's work emergency contacts, which he photographed. He dialed Doris, Chuck's wife. She answered the third call. "Hello, are you Doris Adams?" "Yes, it's me. How did you get this number?" She answered, "This is Dave Baker. I'm the husband of Claire Hughes, who works with your husband Chuck. I'm calling because right now, your husband and my wife are at Skylab doing things that won't pass the test of loyalty." Dave heard a gasp and Doris responded, "That scoundrel, I gave him a second chance and this is what he's doing to me. What are you going to do?" Dave quickly explained, "I'm of course going to divorce her. It's a long story and I won't bore you with the details, but I have no other choice. There's a problem. I'm tracking it with our locator app, so I know when they get back to our house or hotel, but I'm 4 hours away and won't be able to catch them there." Doris made Dave very happy with her answer. "I'm not home tonight, so they might as well go to our house. Look, I'm only an hour away with my brother Mike, who, by the way, hates Chuck. We might as well leave now, and by the time we get back to town, you can tell us where they are and we can surprise them." Dave was very pleased. "Sounds like a plan. I'll send you a recording of their antics at Skylab, and I'd appreciate it if you sent me anything you come up with as a surprise for them." Doris confirmed they were on their way while Dave continued to watch the Skycam and his locator app. Half an hour later, Claire was on her way. She was heading towards a residence that was not Dave's house, so it must have been the Adams house. Dave sent Doris the information. Meanwhile, Claire felt very strange. Alcohol and beautiful men did their job. She couldn't wait to get into bed with Chuck and seal the deal that would guarantee her promotion. She didn't think about consequences, only about results, and she was desperate in her pursuit of results. An hour later, Claire woke up from her post-sex slumber. She was still pretty drunk, But the realization that she had cheated on Dave hit her. Yes, it was for a good cause, but it was still cheating. She decided that she had better return home. However, Chuck also came to his senses at this time and wanted a second round. Claire gave in to his persuasion, and when Doris and Mike arrived, they were in the midst of it. Mike made sure he made enough videos of the lovers, and then Doris intervened. The next thing Claire knew was that someone drags her by the hair. Slap! The same someone hit Claire in the face and then slapped her with the back of their hand. Unfortunately for Claire, the back of the hand had a ring on Doris's finger, and it cut Claire's cheek. "Get out of my house!" Doris screamed as she dragged Claire towards the door. Claire freed herself, grabbed her clothes, and ran as fast as she could. Doris turned around to see what Mike was doing with her husband. Chuck huddled in pain on the floor next to the bed. Claire got dressed in her car and then drove to the hospital emergency room. She had 3 stitches because the wound was too big for glue or tape. She returned home and dragged herself into the bedroom, crying the whole way. How could she explain the cut on her cheek to Dave? Will Doris tell Dave what happened? How could she do such a stupid thing? With these questions swirling in her head, she fell asleep. Meanwhile, Dave was busy. After receiving the video from Doris, he had a job to do. He first emailed his lawyer asking him to forward the following information to the top divorce lawyer at his firm. Enclosed were both post-nuptial agreements, a Skycam video, and a video from Doris. He also attached his log of all the events Claire missed for the kids, in case she decides to fight for custody. There was no way, after all the uncertainty he had been through, other than divorce was the only option. He then sent Claire a message explaining that he and the children would be returning home on Monday, not Sunday. This would allow Dave to change the locks on the house and perhaps arrange a meeting with her at work that day. He wasn't worried about moving the money since it was already so divided. Claire woke up hungover and thought she was having a bad dream until she touched her cheek and realized it wasn't a dream. It was a nightmare. Looking at her phone, she read a message from Dave. She now had more time to come up with her story. She didn't know whether to get involved with Chuck or not. He solved this problem by showing up at her house on Saturday afternoon. "Chuck, what are you doing here?" she asked. "I'm not welcome at home anymore. That's why I came here," Chuck replied. "Well, you can't stay. What will the neighbors say?" Then she quickly added, "Do you think Doris will tell Dave?" "I'm pretty sure she already said. I heard Mike and her talking after they got tired of kicking me and I passed out. In fact, I think it was Dave who told Doris." Then it dawned on Claire, the locator app she insisted on. Dave must have used it to find her, and then informed Doris. Claire was overcome with horror and slammed the door in Chuck's face. Monday arrived and Claire went to work. What else could she do? She applied makeup to minimize the damage to her cheek and went to work. Everything was relatively normal until 1 p.m., when a young man she didn't recognize came to her office door. "Are you Claire Hughes?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Claire replied. "You have been handed it," he said, and handed her the envelope. He took a photo of her and left. Claire and her world fell apart. Meanwhile, Dave was busy changing the locks on the doors of his house. He explained to the children what would happen as they drove home from his parents. He knew school wasn't an option that day, so they were in their rooms, contemplating the destruction of their parents' marriage. Claire finally found the strength to call Dave. Dave answered the second call. "Yes, Claire." "Dave, I made a terrible mistake and I need to talk to you about it," she replied. "You are absolutely right about the mistake. After all the post-nuptial agreements, 13 years, 3 children, and all my love, you made a fatal mistake. You killed our marriage. This is the last time I will talk to you until the divorce is final. I will pursue everything in terms of post-nuptial agreements. Just sign the divorce papers, then you can spend all your time with your true love and not worry about us interfering with your work." And after that, Dave hung up the phone. Claire collapsed into a puddle of tears, her life in ruins. Her insecurities cost her everything. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Second story. I thought that I had a completely normal life. There were ups, there were downs, but there were much more positive moments than negative ones. I married Joyce, the first woman I truly fell in love with, 24 years ago. We had two boys, Dylan and Parker, who at the beginning of this story were enjoying the start of their summer vacation before their senior and sophomore years, respectively, at the same flagship university in our state. Before and after that summer, Joyce and I were alone and enjoying our time together. Joyce only had two complaints about Dylan and Parker. The first is that they didn't communicate with her and me as much as they should have. Doesn't every mother of college-aged boys have that complaint, especially about their personal lives, in which they were less sociable than the Sphinx? Second, they looked and acted so much like me that she wondered if they had passed on some of her DNA. Dylan, Parker, and I are all 190 centimeters tall, weigh between 95 and 100 kilograms, with sandy hair and blue eyes. Physically, I'm almost as fit as they come, thanks to daily cycling, weightlifting, kayaking, and CrossFit. Joyce, 5 years and 8 months ago, weighed 60 kilograms, has almost black hair and green eyes, and is in good physical shape. However, the boys do not look like her at all, neither in face, nor in build, nor in skin color. My only real problem with the family is that Joyce travels too much for business. She's away from home an average of 2 to 3 nights a week. My job is local, and I set my own hours. So if she were home more often, we could do more things together and enjoy life more than we do now, especially since money isn't a big issue for us. One Tuesday, while Joyce was on one of her business trips and Dylan and Parker were at their summer jobs, I was just finishing up a 25-mile bike ride that was one of the best in our area. There were parking lots at E along the route, and I parked in D. It was a great ride on a beautiful sunny day with low dew temperatures. I was about to start braking to turn into parking lot D when I came across a female cyclist riding on the side of the road who appeared to be having serious problems with her bike. I stopped to help. Serious problem? I asked with a half smile, stopping right in front of her bicycle. She was on her knees, inspecting her rear derailleur, and looked up at me, showing her pretty face. She smiled back. Yes, thank you for asking. It seems like the aluminum hanger on my rear derailleur is somehow bent, making it difficult to rotate the rear wheel, let alone shift, she replied, demonstrating a good knowledge of bicycle mechanics. Do you mind if I take a look? I asked. Be so kind, she replied, standing up. I glanced at her quickly as she stood up and walked a couple of steps to the side. I estimated her height to be about 160 centimeters, weight 45-50 kilograms, small breasts, slender but muscular thighs and calves, and a perfect firm ass. And her face became even more beautiful when she stood up. I couldn't get a good look at her hair because of the bike helmet, but since she wasn't wearing sunglasses, her brown, shiny, and expressive doe eyes were clearly visible and very attractive. I examined the rear derailleur and found that her diagnosis was absolutely correct. As far as I can tell, you've pinpointed the problem, I said with a smile, standing up. You also probably already know that even if you manage to get the suspension back in place, you won't be able to do it here on the track. But the rear wheel will have to be removed and the suspension will probably be repaired at a bike shop. That's what I was afraid of, she reflected. Did you park in parking lot D? I asked. No, in parking lot E, about 6 kilometers from here, and I can't get there, she grumbled. I'm in parking lot D, right at the entrance to the bike path. I'll drop you off at your car in parking lot E, I said with a smile. I sensed some wariness on her part, so I took out my ID and handed it to her. Here is my name and address. Call someone you know and tell them I'll give you a ride and that you'll call them back as soon as I give you a ride. This way, if I turn out to be an axe murderer, at least you will die knowing that I will be caught, I stated, saying the last sentence with a wide smile on my face. Only after I said this did I wonder if she would find my joke funny and would she refuse my proposal. A cheeky, impudent man, isn't he? She laughed, instead of running away as a result of my joke. She took my ID, took out her cell phone, and made a call while standing about 2 meters in front of me. "Hi, Cheryl. It's me, Brenda. I'm having trouble with my bike in the bike lane and a guy named Brian Craddock, who lives here in town at 727 Sagamore Lane, will give me a lift to my car. If I end up dead, you know who to send the cops after," she said and laughed into the phone. After a pause, apparently listening to Cheryl, she said, "That's a great idea." Then she looked at me and said with a grin, "Cheryl thinks you should take off your helmet and let me take a picture of you and send it to her so the cops can identify your face in case your ID turns out to be fake." I grinned, took off my helmet, and posed for a photo with a grin on my face. A nice woman who introduced herself as Brenda took a photo with her phone, pressed a few more buttons on it, and put it back to her ear. "Did you get the photo, Cheryl?" She whispered something into the phone. After about 30 seconds of delay, she grinned and said, "You're evil. Thank you," and ended the conversation. "Okay, now if you dismember me, you will definitely be caught," Brenda said with a smile. "Here, you drive my bike, and I'll take yours to my car," I said, fastening the helmet strap to the handlebars of my bike, and then I took her bike and walked on. We chatted a bit on the way to my car. When we got to my car, I put both bikes on the bike rack in the trunk. I threw the helmet in the back seat, opened the passenger door for her, and she took off her helmet and then got in. I couldn't help but notice her shiny dark hair falling on shoulders. What's not to like about this woman's appearance? I was surprised. In the 15 minutes, we rode to parking lot E, which is further down the road than the bike path. We exchanged a surprising amount of personal information. I was unusually open and talkative. There was something about Brenda that inspired trust. I told her about my family, including Joyce's unwanted amount of travel, and about my 2 boys. Brenda was just as outgoing, and her situation was remarkably similar to mine. Her husband, Stan, traveled on business almost as often as Joyce, and she had 2 daughters named Serena and Kira, who were sophomores and graduates at the same state university as Dylan and Parker. "What are your girls studying to be? Maybe Dylan and Parker know them," I asked. "Not if your sons are studying at the Faculty of Engineering, as you said," she grinned. "Serena is studying art with a bachelor's degree in art history, and Kira is studying kinesthesiology with a bachelor's degree in art." I laughed. "I think you're right. Their classes are probably on opposite ends of campus, with 30,000 other students between them." Our conversation was so pleasant that when we pulled into parking lot E, I said, "I have an idea. Since I'm heading to my gym for a CrossFit class after this, and you won't be riding your bike, but you'll be spending time doing it, why don't you leave your bike at Morton's Bike Shop, which is next door to my gym, and you will be at my disposal. My guest today. Have you tried CrossFit? Are you trying to pick me up?" She laughed. "No, just trying to figure out if your body works as well as it seems," I grinned back. "Oops, did I say it out loud?" I grinned. "You're still impudent, aren't you?" She giggled. "Okay, since I don't have anything else planned, I'll try." Long story short, we ended up going to a bike shop. Working out together for an hour, she did exceptionally well for her first time, and then picking up her repaired bike and having lunch at a casual cafe before we said our goodbyes. At the same time, we quickly hugged. Then she said, "If Joyce isn't home tomorrow, why don't you go kayaking down the river with me? I usually go there for an hour or 2 on Wednesdays when Wall not in the city." "With pleasure," I replied. I was planning to go somewhere this week anyway. As you've probably already noticed, my SUV has a rack for 2 kayaks on the roof. "I'll pick you up at, say, 8:00 in the morning," she said. "I'll be ready," I smiled. "I think you already know the address." "Yeah, about that," she chuckled. "I could have stalked you, but you willingly gave up your personal information." "You wouldn't trust me if I didn't do this," I chuckled. "Oh, by the way, getting back to the fact that I gave you my ID, what did your friend Cheryl say to you on the phone that made you tell her you're mean after you emailed her a photo of me." Brenda blushed slightly, but quickly came to her senses, giggling. "I should know that, but you don't." She jumped into her SUV and drove away, quickly waving her hand out the window. Brenda was probably the easiest person to talk to I've ever met. Moreover, although she was far from classically beautiful, the shape of her body and features, as well as her general demeanor, made her as attractive as any other woman I had ever met. As I left, I convinced myself, "You have never cheated on Joyce in the 26 years we've lived together, including 24 years of marriage, and you're not going to start now." I hoped I was right because I hated cheaters. Over the next few weeks, Brenda and I became great friends, since we both had jobs that allowed us to work whenever we wanted, as long as we did it. And since we both loved all types of exercise and outdoor adventures, we worked out together at least 3 times a week, usually for several hours each time. It was really great to make a friend. However, there was a problem. She caused me a strong sexual desire. The problem escalated one day when we both capsized in our kayaks and ended up pulling them ashore. At first we laughed and teased each other, but when Brenda stood up, strapping her paddle to the kayak, her face was very close to mine, as close as possible, given the 30-centimeter difference in our heights. I couldn't help it. I kissed her on the lips. When we parted, she looked me straight in the eyes. "You know that we both hate cheaters, and that the last thing we want is to destroy each other's families. It seems that traitors are always caught sooner or later. I like you too, but kissing like we just kissed will lead to sex, and then, most likely, to disaster." We silently looked into each other's eyes for what seemed like a very long time. While I was looking at her, my big head got the better of me, and I finally answered with a smile, "You're right. I apologize and will keep my hands to myself unless it's to keep you from drowning." She smiled back, quickly kissed me on the lips and said, "Since you are so noble, and since you have weakened my knees with your love affairs, how about tying my kayak, in addition to yours, to the roof of my SUV?" I obeyed. For a week, nothing more was said or done, but after some time we had a dialogue. "It's really difficult for me, Brenda. We need to do something to help me cool my ardor towards you," I muttered. "I also need something to cool my ardor towards you," she moaned in response. "But I can't stop talking to you. We have such a good time doing different things together. You're more fun than anyone else I've ever been with, and I don't want to give up on our friendship or activities," I grumbled. After another pause, she raised her head. "I have what I hope is a partial solution. From what you told me, Joyce is a very nice person, and so is Stan. Getting to know each other's spouses and perhaps even families can help quell any lustful feelings." I thought for a minute while her mind seemed to be mulling over possible scenarios. "I think you're right," I replied. "What will we do next?" "I'm planning to have a barbecue at my house next Saturday. I'll put you, Dylan, and Parker on the guest list. There will be at least 30 people there, including at least 15 people the same age as Serena and Kira. How do you like this proposal?" "Let's make this work," I grinned, and then avoided physical contact with her for the rest of the day. Brenda's BBQ turned out great. I met Stan and she met Joyce, and the other adults were friendly too. There wasn't a single idiot among them. Joyce and I were introduced to Serena and Kira. Brenda was right except for the fact that each of them was about 5 centimeters taller than Brenda and perhaps 5 kilograms heavier. They seemed more like Brenda's clones than her children. I saw Serena and Kira introduce themselves to Dylan and Parker, and all the kids under 22 seemed to be having fun together, playing volleyball, beer ping pong, and other games in Brenda and Stan's backyard, which seemed ideal for such events. We were one of the last to leave the party around midnight. On the way home, Joyce, of course, tried to ask the boys if they had met any interesting people. All they said, with Cheshire cat grins, was that they had a good time and were glad they came. However, they were, predictably, completely silent about whether they liked any of the dozen very attractive women, ranging in age from 17 to 22, who were present at the party. Brenda and I reminisced about the party when we went for a bike ride and lunch the following Monday. I asked her if Serena and Kira were at all impressed by the cute guys there. Brian, because I had an overly intrusive mother, I never ask questions about such things, and they do not share information voluntarily. Stan tried to ask them about it, but they just laughed at him. We had fun, Dad, but we weren't engaged, so leave it as is, they told him. The party had the desired effect. One weekend, I went to a professional baseball game with Stan and two other guys, and Brenda went to a play with Joyce and the other two guys' wives at the same time. For the next 2+ weeks, even though Brenda and I went on walks together 7 times, things remained low-key between us. We had fun, but no kisses or caresses. And then the train went off the rails. In a strange turn of events, Joyce and Stan held unusual conferences out of town on a Friday afternoon and Sunday afternoon 3 weeks after Brenda's party. Dylan and Parker left for the weekend on Friday night to go to the beach, and Serena and Kira left for the weekend on Saturday morning to visit some sorority sisters at the lake house where one of their parents lives. Brenda was bragging about what a good dancer she was, and we were confident in our ability to avoid any lustful contact, so we agreed to go out to dinner and a club. We didn't hide it from Joyce or Stan, but we had to promise them that the 4 of us would go out to dinner and a club next Saturday. "You find the best club for us," was Joyce's opinion. When I picked up Brenda early Saturday evening, she looked as good as ever. Although she wore a dress to the barbecue, which was the only time I saw her in such an outfit, she looked very modest there, including her hair in a bun, no makeup, and the dress did not highlight her toned hips or a sculpted butt. Her dress really suited her this evening. She wore just the right amount of light makeup. Her hair was neat but loose around her shoulders, and she looked radiant. We had a relatively modest dinner, although there was a lot of laughter, including at least half a dozen off-color jokes she heard from her friend Cheryl, a spinster nurse. We went to one club, which seemed too boring to us, but the second one was fun and just right. Brenda was as good a dancer as she thought she was, and for a guy who never learned to dance, I can hold my own with anyone. Plus, I wanted to stay on the dance floor with Brenda because I didn't want her dancing with anyone else, and even then I had to discourage a couple of drunks with my strong hand. 2 unusual things happened that evening. The first unusual thing was that Brenda drank more alcohol than I had ever seen. She and I are both almost teetotalers, but not this evening. Between dinner and clubbing, she probably had 2 glasses of wine and 4 pina coladas, and I just had a couple of beers. Secondly, when we danced 2 slow dances, including the last one, she pressed herself against me. When we drove to drop her off around 1 a.m., she was giddy and chatty. She constantly made contact with me, although in a playful rather than overtly sexual manner. When we got to her house, she said, "Could you come in and help me replace a couple of screens that I moved today? I don't want Stan to know that I did this because it's a sore spot between us." "Can this wait until tomorrow?" I asked. "No, because I want to sleep longer, and Stan should be back after lunch." "Come on, Brian, baby." Brenda noticed that I was hesitating. "I really need your help, boy. I'll even tell you what Cheryl said when I emailed her a photo of you the day we met," she giggled. I relented and we entered her house. She had a little trouble with the key, so I opened the door for her. We made love. We had breakfast. During our conversation at breakfast, I said, "I almost forgot. Last night, you lured me into your lair with the promise of telling me what your friend Cheryl said when you emailed her a photo of me when we first met." "I must," she moaned. "Yes, unless you want me to attack you," I fake growled. She jumped out of her chair, screamed, and started running. She didn't really try too hard to escape, and I caught her easily. I got dressed and got ready to leave long before Stan was due to return. The neighbors on the south side are on vacation, and I would love it if you would go out the back door and walk around their property so no one sees you coming out of my front door at 9 in the morning. "It would be difficult to explain," she chuckled. Let's go for a bike ride on Tuesday. I'll be there on my bike at 9:30 and we can have a snack at my place when we're done, I said with an evil grin. Fine. Sounds like a plan, she smiled back. The feeling of guilt only hit me on Sunday evening. As Joyce fell asleep on my shoulder, I thought about Brenda. I knew I had to give it up, but I didn't know if I could exercise enough self-control to do so. That Tuesday began a series of regular meetings between me and Brenda. Although the days and circumstances changed, over the next few months, what happened that Tuesday happened often. While Brenda and I were in a relationship, we didn't kid ourselves that what we were doing was normal and without possible consequences. Neither of our spouses deserved their partner's infidelity. Despite our feelings of guilt, if not for the danger, we probably would never have separated. We were so attached to each other. On Wednesday, when Joyce and Stan were out of town on business, we went on one of our classic bike rides and then made love at my house. However, on that particular day, Brenda had some other errands to run and I had an appointment that afternoon, so we deviated from our normal routine and she rode off on her bike instead of asking me to give her a ride. When Brenda left for some reason, I immediately took off the sheets covering the guest room bed and put them in the washing machine before I showered so there would be no residue. While I was in the shower, Joyce came into the bathroom. I was shocked to see her. "Hi, honey," she chirped. "Are you happy to see me?" "Glad, but surprised," I answered through the shower door, my dick completely covered in soap. "I finished early. I left a message on your cell phone, but seeing as your bike is parked outside and you're in the shower, I'm guessing you were out on a bike ride. Probably with Brenda or Jack. Jack was my occasional riding companion. Cycling. I rode bikes with both of them, Detective Joyce," I laughed, telling my partial white lie. The next day I met Brenda in the park and told her about the near miss. If we had been caught, which we avoided in less than 5 minutes, and only because I had accidentally taken the sheets off the bedspread in the guest room, our families would have been destroyed. Brenda looked very thoughtful. After a pause, she looked into my eyes. "Our relationship with you is the brightest event in my life, but I experience the same feelings of guilt and fear as you. If we didn't have kids and if our spouses were jerks, things would be different. But we have children, even if they are in college, and our spouses are wonderful people who don't deserve our infidelity. So we need to find a way to end this." I nodded in agreement, and then a thought came to my mind. You know, I could finance our visit to a psychologist to help us decide what to do so that Joyce doesn't find out anything. Do you agree? She said, "We have a serious problem. I can agree with you to pay for the services of a psychologist. Make an appointment and I will try to make time work for us." We kissed, returned to our cars without computers, and drove away. By the evening of the same day, after asking and calling names, I made an appointment for Friday with Dr. Meg Sheehan, a renowned psychologist and marriage counselor living in a nearby suburb. I called Brenda on Thursday morning and told her she agreed. After agreeing to pay her extra to see us after hours, and after describing to her our problem, guilt and fear, Dr. Sheehan agreed to see us 4 times over the next 2 weeks. We were lucky to have help because we simply could not cope with our dependence on each other on our own. We were getting too bold, so exposure was inevitable unless we could somehow stop it. By the 3rd session, Dr. Sheehan diagnosed our problem. Although she described it in clinical terms, she also described it in layman's terms. Her explanation was this: "You two are simply dependent on each other, especially in sex." I don't use this term lightly. In the media, you always hear about people saying they have a sex addiction, but 99% of the time, this is bullshit and just an excuse for promiscuous behavior. "There is no such thing as clinical sexual addiction?" Brenda asked. "There are several real clinical cases. There may be 1 man in 500,000 and 1 woman in 1,000,000, but they are rare and addiction is not limited to 1 person. Although I can't give you a real explanation for this, you two and yours is only the second in my experience are dependent only on each other. Today, I'm going to introduce you to techniques and remedies that you can use to start ending your relationship because you need to be careful. This is the only thing that will work for you too, she announced grimly. We realized Meg Sheehan was right. By the end of our fourth session with Dr. Sheehan, we had learned all we could about techniques to help us cope with depression and were given a homeopathic libido suppressant to take for the first 2 weeks. Then, in each other's presence, we blocked our cell phone numbers and email addresses on each other's phones. We parted with a kiss that touched our souls. We went cold turkey just before Thanksgiving, and the approaching holidays helped combined with Meg Sheehan's techniques and maybe even homeopathic remedies, though I wasn't so sure to deal with it. For the first month, I called Brenda every day. Sometimes I stopped myself, sometimes I actually called, but since my number was blocked, I couldn't get through. Gradually, I brought other sexual experiences into my relationship with Joyce and made a truly concerted effort to keep her needs and Dylan's and Parker's at the center of my attention. By Christmas, I was well on my way to breaking my addiction to Brenda. Whenever Joyce asked about meeting Brenda and Stan, I avoided answering. Meg warned us that if we met in person, we would certainly relapse, and that after a relapse, it would be even more difficult to recover. It also helped that both Dylan and Parker were on good terms. Not only were they doing well at school, but from what Joyce and I overheard, and from their smiling refusal to answer some of Joyce's questions, I suspected, and Joyce was convinced, that they both had girlfriends. They, of course, often went away on vacation, and for spring break the following year, but they were always cheerful when they were at home. In addition, they communicated with us on the phone even more often than usual, although the issue of girlfriends was not discussed as a topic of conversation. By the time Dylan was ready to graduate from college, I was as proud and happy as I could be. My relationships with Joyce, Dylan, and Parker were as strong as ever, and my sex life with Joyce was more exciting than before I met Brenda. Everything in my life seemed to fall into place. Of course, I still thought about Brenda daily, but my coping mechanisms had improved to the point where I rarely felt torment. I was a little nervous about attending the graduation because I assumed Brenda's daughter, Kira, would be graduating from the same university on the same day. However, since there were over 8,000 graduates that year, like most major universities, the chances of meeting someone from another school were slim. Dylan was graduating from school with a degree in electrical engineering, and assuming nothing had changed since I last talked to Brenda about it, which was about 7 months ago, Kira was due to get her degree at the School of Arts and Sciences Kinesiology, and her graduation ceremony was to take place on the other side. The campus was almost 3 kilometers from where Dylan was getting diploma. Even though there was going to be an all-school commencement ceremony at the football stadium, and with over 50,000 faculty, families, and guests likely to be in attendance, I convinced myself that I had an infinitesimal chance of seeing Brenda. Joyce, Parker, and I were proud of Dylan when he graduated, and the 4 of us took a lot of photos. We also enjoyed the joint ceremony at the football stadium and never ran into Brenda and Stan. Interestingly, though, as we were leaving the stadium, Dylan walked away to return his cap and gown, and me wondering where we should go for the holiday dinner. Parker said, "Mom and Dad, there is something that I have to tell you, and in a special way. Dylan and I booked a conference room on the 3rd floor of the Student Union. Could you meet us there in an hour?" Of course, Joyce and I had many questions to which Parker answered evasively. "Just meet me and everything will open up," he finally answered with a hearty laugh. When Joyce and I walked into the conference room 58 minutes later, I was shocked to see Brenda and Stan there. When Brenda saw me, her eyes showed the same fear that was in my brain and heart. Stan and Joyce were happy to see each other, while Brenda and I avoided physical contact and tried unsuccessfully to act as normal. We chatted for a bit, mostly Stan and Joyce, as both Brenda and I had a deer in the headlights look on our faces until, thankfully, we heard Parker laughing as he headed into the room. If I was stunned to see Brenda, it was not so much compared to how I felt when I saw Parker, our youngest son, enter the room holding hands with Serena, Brenda's youngest daughter. They both had smug smiles on their faces. Brenda and I were silent while Stan, Joyce, Parker, and Serena chatted non-stop. After numerous no jokes, how sweet, and other euphemisms, Parker got to the point, answering Joyce's question about how they first met. It was love at first sight at the barbecue Stan and Brenda had last summer, Parker said. We've been dating since then. Parker then continued. This summer, Serena and I will find jobs at the university and plan to live in the same apartment, not only this summer, but for the rest of our college years, planning to get married after graduation or maybe even before graduation if we can wait. The lustful and loving glances that Parker and Serena exchanged made me think that they might not be able to wait. Oh, damn, Brenda could be my godfather, I mentally groaned. I noticed the frightened expression on Brenda's face. But at least we'll be careful, which I can't say about Kira and Dylan, Serena laughed. While this little joke was spinning around in my head and turning into a pretzel, Dylan and Kira walked into the room holding hands. After a long chat, with Brenda and I even more in shock, Joyce asked the same question she asked Parker. So how did you two meet? We felt mutual attraction at the barbecue where we first met, Kira answered, although it wasn't quite love at first sight, like Parker and Serena. However, after our first date, we realized that there was something between us, and it quickly turned into love. We first became close on the same trip as Parker and Serena, Dylan said with a smile, when I was supposed to be on the beach and Kira was at the house by the lake. And then the final blow. Dylan and I are going to get married in 2 weeks. We want to have a simple ceremony with family and friends. We both have jobs in our hometown and an apartment just 3 kilometers from Mom and Dad and only 6 kilometers from you, Joyce and Brian. Kira smiled, looking first at her parents and then at Joyce and me. Why such a rush? Joyce asked. I'm 6 weeks pregnant, Kira giggled as Dylan kissed her cheek and squeezed her hand. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Brenda faint and Stan caught her. I was practically in a stupor. Question, how the hell can I resist Brenda when we are related and have a common grandson? Was spinning in my head all the time. Of course, I didn't have the answer, and I doubted that even Dr. Meg Sheehan could help us with it, especially since it was obviously the biology of fate. If my sons, who looked and acted just like me, were head over heels in love with Brenda's daughters, who looked and acted just like her, what chance did I have of resisting Brenda? Shit. Subscribe to our channel so that your second chaff doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one. Listening to the next one.